Hello, you malted moorhens, and thank you to Whiskey Gulper for providing the malt mention introduction here in the Whiskey Bothy, somewhere in the middle of the very wet and windy Irish Sea. Introducing Ralphie Review 1055, which was originally going to be this that I was reviewing, which will now have to wait till next week for Ralphie Review for Whiskey Bothy Review 1056, because I happened to be in the supermarket, right, and I took a double take on the price of this bottle of Talisker, and it was £23. Got the receipt, £23. And of course I did what anybody would do. I got my mobile phone out and I just had a quick check and saw that it was literally half price. This was half price. I'm going to explain why I think that's the case in Ralphie Review 1055 Extras, which will be coming along shortly after this review. But in the meantime, for all my dedicated Patreon subscribers, I know that in my recent live stream, thanks for all your questions, by the way, I did say I was going to be reviewing this next, but it gives you another week, in case you haven't got enough in your stash, to get it into your stash pronto before I review it, okay? Just sharing. The very first Scotch whisky I ever reviewed in my channel back in 2009. Yeah, I know. I'm a YouTube veteran. Was Talisker 10-year-old. And it was still decent. Although even back then I could see that there were changes taking place. The casks being used just weren't as full with their influence as they were in the 1990s and 1980s, and it's well seeing that the dedicated die-hard aficionados with deep pockets of the Talisker brand are basically trawling the auctions and also private sellers now for these very fine old young, generally, Taliskers from the 1960s and 70s and into the early 1980s. And the independent bottlings were quite phenomenal at the time, particularly from Cadenheads, because, of course, back then there weren't that many independent bottlers. And back then we didn't realise the full scale of the difference between how an independent bottler prepared their whisky for market and how an official bottler would engineer down their whisky to remove its complexity, to diminish its dynamics, for a very simple and practical reasons, because they wanted to sell whisky to people who didn't drink whisky very often. And it's all very well for you and I. We're malt mates. Our palate knows its way around whiskies and other spirits now, because of the changes, so many changes that have taken place in the last, particularly 15 years. But back then, things were a lot more simple. And the passive consumer, the occasional buyer, they didn't spend much time looking at the options they had. They just went for Glenfiddich or Macallan, or if they were trying to do it in a real tight budget, they just settled for a bottle of Famous Grouse or Bell's. And that's the way it worked. We're talking about back in the 70s and the 80s, was the age of Campari and soda and Babycham, of sweet sherries and vodka, Bloody Marys, vodka slammers, vodka and Coke. They were the most unexcited, insipid period of alcoholic beverages, without exception. Things have changed though. The whole global dynamic is changing, and I'm reviewing this whisky in that context. For those of you who know your way around whisky, please bear with me. This is for the beginner. This review is to give an illustration, an explanation to beginners and people who are maybe just a couple of years into the whisky journey that haven't really committed too much money, but their interest is sparked. So what have we got here? We've got Skye. Now there's a lot of versions of Talisker. It used to be the 10-year-old and that was it, actually. And then you had the Distiller's Edition arrived and it was an entertaining option. But now you've got so many varieties as the producers multitask a single brand to be a version of many things. And the Skye is basically the softer, sweeter, gentler version of Talisker that's not going to be so frightening for people who live their lives on pizzas, carry-outs and microwave meals. And heaven help us, some of these commercial ice creams, the sweetness in them is appalling. But this is what's guiding their palate now. So many consumers, they're not consuming for flavour, they're consuming for sensation. And the primary sensation is sweet. It's the most addictive, it's the cheapest that makes the most profit for the producers. And that's the lie of the land. So I totally get it with Diageo. The world's biggest single malt Scotch whisky maker, and this creates a real challenge for them. How do they reach out to a disinterested, lazy audience that doesn't really care? And although I'd kind of criticise a lot of whisky marketing, I do so from the context of an experienced whisky drinker. I find it condescending and patronising, but it's what works for your lazy consumer who is basically addicted to TikTok and these cookie cutter sludge movies that are coming out of Hollywood these days that really have no substance. And there's a lot of them. Nose. Sweet. Syrup. Malty. You're getting the peat presence. It's not crisp. It's not full-bodied. It's restrained. It's diminished. It's a bit more two-dimensional. And on the nose, this comes across as almost Talisker dessert. It's not, I wouldn't call it Southern Comfort. Do you know what I mean? It's not a sweetened liquor, but it has that very sweet side to it. And there's something else I noticed about this I'm going to mention further on in the review in relation to that sweetness. In the meantime, it's a non-age statement whisky. It's bottled at 45.8%. There we go. Not 46, 45.8. I'm sure there's some kind of reason somewhere. It is chill filtered. It does have caramel in it. You can see that. I mean, look at that. Do you see the kind of orangey glow? That's caramel. Every time. When I'm rolling it around the side of the glass, you get another indicator as to chill filtration because the legs, the coat line's quite thin. The legs, it kind of falls down the glass quite quickly. So we're looking at a relatively young whisky, 6 or 7 years old, which has been in active, very industrially prepared casks. Casks that perhaps a combination of sherry and bourbon, but so much more is going on. And you know as well as I do that whisky industry has a habit of fobbing us off with, oh yeah, it's 35% bourbon and 55% sherry and, you know, and it's basically Oloroso. It's not even starting to begin to describe what's really going on with these casks. That is such a superficial overview, and it's really designed again for lazy consumers that just get a little bit extra of something rather than nothing to make them feel more engaged and connected with the brand. Taste. You wouldn't even need to add water. The additional alcohol kicks out the phenolic. The phenolic is quite rounded, quite simple and straightforward. It's that peatiness. The peatiness is fairly pedestrian. It doesn't have much dynamic to it, and it tends to dominate after the arrival. This kind of superficiality of its presence it really comes and then it goes quite rapidly, and then at the tail end, it leaves this peculiar, light sweetness. It's not saccharin or aspartame or sucralose. It's more like stevia. Do you know, a naturally sourced artificial sweetener? There's something there, and particularly when you add a drop of water. And this is usually why the brand ambassador would recommend you add ice, because it's going to suggest the flavour that really isn't there. That's what the purpose of ice is, unless you're in a particularly warm country. I've added 5 millilitres of water, full teaspoon. On the nose, a little bit more fruitiness coming through now. Dried apricot, a little bit of pickled pineapple. It's definitely opening up, although, as I've demonstrated, you could drink this neat, no problem at all. And of course, you know and I know the majority of occasional or disinterested whisky consumers, they just gulp whisky. They don't drink whisky. They don't sip it because they don't particularly like the flavour. It's just the best thing to have around to see in the new year when you're watching television, because you've got nothing else to do in your life. Does that sound cruel? I know. It does. A little bit of lime oil in there as well. The old fragrance, the old delicacy of Talisker is kind of showing itself a little bit more, but not much. It's still quite restrained. Oh, a much fuller mouthfeel. Much more fruity. Now, you've got that pickled pineapple thing, a little bit of light banana, green banana almost, unripe apples, unripe pears. That malt note is just more authentic now. There's more bitterness in the malt note, more astringency, which is what old Talisker should have. And again, I'm noticing now, as soon as the arrival's over, there's this kind of line of, I'll call it the line of sweetness, this line of sweet note that kind of runs right through the development, which isn't that complex, and into the finish, and actually extends beyond the finish, which is light and slightly fusile, and it just creates this slightly stevia-ish aftertaste. It's peculiar. I've noticed this fleetingly before, but never as pronounced as this. One more taste before the malt mark. You see, the difference is, and this probably comes across as quite a harsh review in many respects, but I've known Talisker for 40 years. I bought my first bottle of the 10-year-old in the 1980s. 1985, so roughly 40 years. I've seen the changes, I've witnessed the changes, but I understand the changes. But at the same time, I really kind of miss that drama and elemental nature of the old school Taliskers, which I now remember with such fondness, because I had nothing to compare them, so I took them for granted at the time. But this is a whisky I would give to a visitor at the new year or after the new year or any time in 2025 who doesn't drink whisky and isn't particularly interested. This is the sort of Talisker it is. It is perfectly competent, don't get me wrong. It is a competent malt. But for the experienced malt person, it's going to get quite boring quite quickly. I'm just telling you, this is a review. I bought the bottle, £23 a bottle. Let's give this a malt mark before I go there. There we go. 78. If it hadn't been chill filtered, would have got more of what's there. I'm just giving a reflective opinion, folk. I know that some of you Talisker fans will criticise, say, hey Ralphie, that mark's too low. No, it's not. I paid £23 for that bottle. I went on my mobile. Standard retail price, £46 a bottle. So this was effectively half price. That's the reason I bought it. That's the reason I'm reviewing it. Because I wouldn't pay full price for this. Not when there's other whiskies like Lechake 10-year-old out there, which provide simply far more of an event for the whisky sipper. Infinitely more. But we know what Talisker can be because we know what it used to be. And we've just got to ask ourselves, how good would Talisker be if Springbank owned it and wound back the clock to produce it the old school way, the old style way, when it had a little bit more coal smoke in it, when it had a bit more dynamic peat range in it. But I totally get it. You're a global company, you've got a global market, and you've got customers who are very, very spoiled for choice. So I'm not going to criticise Diageo for this. If I'm going to criticise anyway, it's the laziness of the passive consumer. That's who I'm going to criticise. But as a big corporate multinational company, Talisker have got to Diageo have got to provide Talisker for everyone to justify their major expansion of the distillery production premises on the Isle of Skye. Now, I want to wind up by saying that in my next review, 1055 Extras, I will be talking about the quandary that I have with Talisker, where you've got one version of Talisker doubled the price about a year ago, and this version of Talisker half the price. What are we to make of that? What messages are we as the consumers, because although we are customers, we regard ourselves as customers, big corporations, we're all just minnows and ants. We are just consumers, and we've got to accept that status and keep our honesty about the relationship we have. It's why we have such an appeal for the new small distilleries who connect with us just so much more directly. But you've got another version, the 18-year-old. It doubled from 85 to 170 pounds. It's up to 190 pounds a bottle now. So how come one version doubles in price and then a year later another version halves in price? I'm going to go over that. But there's one final thing I want to conclude with now. Where's that box? Here it is. The box is sitting in the fire because it's going to become biofuel. Boxes, pretty pointless. All it is an extension of marketing. It's to provide a little bit of colour candy to make the lazy consumer who's looking at the rainbow spectrum of choice under these super bright lights, and they're in a hurry because everybody's in a hurry no matter what they're doing or where they're going or where they've been these days. Everybody's in such a rush. So they're going to have limited time. Right, what's the colourful one? What's the one with the most drama on it? Well, we'll go with this because it's made by the sea. It's made by the sea. Can you see that? It's in gold lettering, so you probably can't. I have a problem with that claim, made by the sea, and I'll tell you why. Because whiskey's made in warehouses, and raw British spirit, also known as cleric, is made by the sea when it comes to Talisker. No quibbles there. But the chances of that same liquor coming off the stills and being actually matured on site, on Skye, by the sea, is not the way that Diageo work. They mature at a premises called Blackgrange. Google it. Blackgrange, Scotland. You will see the biggest Scotch whisky warehouses in the world. In Scotland. Right in the centre of Scotland. As far away from the sea as you can possibly get. And yet they're saying it's made by the sea. I think, in my opinion, right, just my opinion, they're making false claims. That's my opinion. And I think a lawyer could have them for this. But hey, it's just my opinion. There you go. Always, because there's a kind of glossy finish, it always burns quite brightly. It's great for getting a fire started. I mean, I'm not going to use the box for anything else. Cheers, maltsters.